Hello everyone, today we read and comment on the third chapter of the first book of von Clausewitz, Vom Kriege. The text follows. From the coup d'oeil and resolution we are naturally to speak of its kindred quality, presence of mind, which in a region of the unexpected like war must act a great part, for it is indeed nothing but a great conquest over the unexpected. As we admire presence of mind in a pithy answer to anything said unexpectedly, so we admire it in a ready expedient on sudden danger. Neither the answer nor the expedient need to be in themselves extraordinary if they only hit the point, for that which as the result of mature reflection would be nothing unusual, therefore insignificant in its impression on us, may as an instantaneous act of the mind produce a pleasing impression. The expression presence of mind certainly denotes very fitly the readiness and rapidity of the help rendered by the mind. Whether this noble quality of a man is to be ascribed more to the peculiarity of his mind or to the equanimity of his feelings depends on the nature of the case, although neither of the two can be entirely wanting. A telling repartee bespeaks rather a ready wit, a ready expedient on sudden danger implies more particularly a well-balanced mind. So, these two passages, while brief, are particularly important as the prosecution of the topic that we discussed in the previous video. And essentially, they furnish the point of junction between those two qualities of the mind of war for war that are respectively the understanding that is largely a rational aspect, but at the same time resolution, that is this form of courage that is necessary to take action, right? So that while you can be very intelligent but not having and understanding everything that basically the situation is presenting you, you may not have the courage to follow action, right? So the mind should give you the calculation, the let's say the odds, fundamentally, as we have seen that in Clausewitzian theory there is no certainty ever. 3/4 of what happens in terms of when you have to take a decision is and you have to base upon is unknown. So there has to be this particular esprit de finesse, if we want, and this ability of this coup d'oeil, as it's actually properly defined by von Clausewitz. But at the same time, you need something that has to push on the accelerator when the mind says green light. But nevertheless, and vice versa, by the way, because you can be an extremely courageous person, but not being intelligent, and that's actually even worse. Intelligence is more important than courage in war, and that's even worse simply because when you're courageous but you act inconsiderately and therefore you take action in a moment which basically you don't know what you're doing, you basically get automatically slowed down, because it doesn't matter how courageous you are once you're met with the new problems that you didn't consider and that multiply while you take action. Well, you freeze because you realize that courage by itself cannot work without understanding. Nevertheless, and this is what von Clausewitz is talking here, there is this other quality, which is the presence of the mind. Von Clausewitz says, from the coup d'oeil and resolution that we have just described, we are naturally to speak of its kindred quality, that is, the presence of mind, which in a region of the unexpected like war must act a great part, for it is indeed nothing but a great conquest over the unexpected. So it's as if, in fact, both that, let's say, ability in judging by eye with the coup d'oeil and resolution, this particular form of courage to take action when it's needed, is not really enough. You really need something that operates in your mind, is this presence of mind, right? That is particularly interesting to to conceive as a term in the first place. It's literally the Geistesgegenwart. So, in fact, literally, this presence, this, really being there with your mind, with your spirit, actually, which in this sense is something more than just at the rational level. It's something totalizing, if you want. You have to stay there, focus with your mind on that, and it's a very wide and actually open concept, because you have to stay basically exposed to what happens, and concentrated on all, as much as you can, fundamentally in economical, with an obvious economical criterion, so that you have to be able to discriminate and to understand. Not just like could be a tunnel vision. Doesn't mean this presence of mind doesn't mean to be concentrated on one thing and losing perception of the rest. That's actually dreadful, especially in war, because war, as here von Clausewitz says, is the region of the unexpected, right? So you can't just follow. You should be able to follow a track, as we have seen. Von Clausewitz tells us that there is a light that we can basically look at fundamentally from within ourselves. Within ourselves, and giving us a direction into this fog of war that doesn't make us understand what the hell is going on for 3/4 at least of the time, in order to decide and take action accordingly. And therefore this presence is required to be there at all times. So it doesn't matter how the situation changes and evolves. You do not have to leave let's say your mind behind on certain details and certain issues, and to fix on them fundamentally, but to be able, on the contrary, to be capable of taking always the next step almost immediately. This is now what von Clausewitz tells us, is that you have to be particularly ready, not just predisposed, but you have to catch really the moment and build upon it, right, at every single time. And it's not easy, evidently, and it's a quality that also naturally comes from a set of qualities, also in here mainly too, as we will read, but that naturally can vary by a large degree. And naturally what really varies by the largest is war proper, so what is going on there, which means you're obviously not programmed to cope with literally, not just with the unexpected normally, or at least you are, but with a certain, in a certain amount of time, but also you're probably not prepared to cope with what's going to happen in the first place. And military history is particularly useful into this, because it's not that you can know exactly what you can properly expect, because every situation is different. So that's also one of the reasons why there is no actual manual to read war. There is no actual science you can apply to war, and that's why this becomes an art with all its training and expertise that is built actually upon with great effort and great, let's say, and also getting into the trouble directly, even without knowing a big much. This is how it is for many crafts. Actually, in order to have to understand it, how it works, you have to start trying it. As in last video, I made the example of the musical instrument, right? You can study all the theory of music and how this instrument is built and how it sounds and how it's supposed to be played, but until you don't take an instrument to actually play it, you do not know a lot of things that theory in this sense cannot really teach you. And it's particularly interesting how the presence of mind here is defined, because it is indeed, von Clausewitz says, nothing but a great conquest over the unexpected. right? It's like, you know, being ready to cope with the situation, to take, let's say, it's as if the commander stayed there in front of the fog of war and told it, you know, come on, give me your best shot, right? So it naturally requires certain, the particular predispositions, but it's also, if you want, there is a sort of competition. You know, competitive people are pretty up to this task usually, orientatively speaking. That's not enough in itself, but that renders you a bit the idea. Although it's way more complex in general, and especially particularly difficult to achieve in practice. But I think it happens. Also in here we will see how Clausewitzian thought really can relate to many aspects of your life. I mean, I can, if you think about it, I guess everyone has a memory of his or her own life that is about, in that moment I kind of gave a pretty damn good answer to the situation, to cope with the situation, right? And it worked, and it felt great, and it was cool, right? So this is the great conquest over the unexpected, right? Then obviously there is a long series of defeats, but in that sense, defeats teach hardly. It's how our world really works. We exist actually not because there was a real improvement, but because other people died in some way. And think about even evolution, how it is. It's naturally, in my opinion, it's dangerous to apply to history in general. Such ideas like such analogies with the biological world, but it's in this sense it's the frustration of the failure that sometimes brings you to sharpen your mind in order to cope with the situation better next time, if you have such a choice, in case which you're probably lucky, or at least it's relatively it wasn't such a heavy blow after all. And so here von Clausewitz goes on and says, as we admire presence of mind in a pithy answer to anything said unexpectedly, so we admire it in a ready expedient on sudden danger. So here it's the everyday lives comparison von Clausewitz makes to in order to make us understand more clearly. We appreciate when a person is confronted with someone and is asked a question, maybe he's designed to put this person in difficulty, as an enemy can do on the battlefield with an action, and that person replies actually properly and is able to catch the real essence of the question, to know the answer, and sometimes and there is a sort of magic surrounding the whole thing, because this happens. I mean, if you've been into, you can see that even from school, but the more you progress, even in I don't know, universities or work, you realize that there is this form of competition. Like, there are very complex questions that are asked, or problems that need to be solved, and most of the times there is not quite a manual of how to deal with those particular situations, and it turns out that actually the best professionals out there are those who kind of built their own system to solve the problem, or at least that have gained this particular expertise that naturally favors them in solving that problem. But in this case, the presence of mind is yet it's something additional to it. I mean, you can maybe even have the answer, and we will see now how von Clausewitz says this. I mean, you can maybe, if you're posed that question and you can go back home reading your sources, and coming the day after having formed an opinion, etc., there would be pretty, nothing really strange in, or particularly let's say extraordinary in providing that question with a decent answer, right? So what is really praised in here is the how sudden and unexpected such not just the question really is, but the answer at the end of the day really is. So you can have someone who actually knows the answer, but for example is not able to deliver it in time or in that particular context. It can be, it's not necessarily a weakness, because it's objectively difficult to make up your mind sometimes with sudden unforeseen challenges. So that's why it's appreciated, right? In fact, von Clausewitz here expressly says we admire this presence of mind. We admire this ability of meeting and coping with the unexpected effectively, right? With giving really the right answer to it and solving the problem, right? And here it's particularly important in war, because war has naturally always this offensive design. All right, the question that one of your students can make you, if you're teaching them, and it may be just a curiosity. There's no malice behind it, or at least maybe there is this idea of asking the professor, let's see if this guy knows the answer. That's something mild. When you're on a battlefield, this means that the enemy is doing his very best to wipe the hell out of you. So at that point, this presence of mind really makes the difference, because it doesn't take to have the best intelligence in there, or to have the best guns, let's say, the bigger guns, but this ability of making these two things working together, because there's really no glue, at least necessarily, to make them work the way it's required to meet that threat effectively. So this is particularly important. This presence of mind is naturally stressed by von Clausewitz as what is required, right, to make us understand how the thing is supposed to work, to admonish us, saying that it's actually difficult to have this presence of mind, and I can't even tell you properly how you can get that. Obviously there is I can't tell you, but let's say not to you individually now. You have to figure that out by yourself, and that's really how life, not just war, practically is. As long as you understand that that's the point. It doesn't take to have the best. It's like when you write a thesis, right? Maybe you're a smart person, maybe your business, right? And you have lots of sources, and you collect them, so you have a lot of material, etc. Well, that still doesn't make the thesis done. You have to naturally, this has not much to do with the presence of mind, meaning with the immediacy of the problem to be solved, but it's definitely you need something extra to those qualities of you that are, those that dramatically advantage you, obviously, but that need at the end of the day to be brought together, right? In every research, this is particularly evident. Like, it's like taking all the ingredients and even knowing how it works to theoretically to put them together to make whatever you want to make, but still having to get through the thing. Right, and maybe with a timer, because you're in a hurry and you have to do it anyway. So, well, that's where the presence of mind really helps. I hope I'm somewhat effective with my examples, although I don't want too many, misconceptions to be thrown on the table. So, going on with von Clausewitz, that's definitely much better than me. He says, neither the answer nor the expedient need be in themselves extraordinary, if they only hit the point. For that which as a result of mature reflection would be nothing unusual, therefore insignificant in its impression on us, may as an instantaneous act of the mind produce a pleasing impression, right? So, in other words, here he's saying, there are we partly covered this already. He's telling that you don't require to provide the best solution ever. You just need to to hit the point proper. It's like playing, tennis. Let's assume. I mean, it doesn't really matter how you get the ball thrown from the other side when it's thrown at you. Well, as long as you make it, right? So that's all it counts. And in that context, it's the readiness that really matters. So here von Clausewitz says, nor the answer nor the expedient need to be themselves extraordinary. You can even say something pretty banal. Actually, this happens also in the world of history, of teaching, education, disclosure, popular entertaining, and so on. What you need to have a person that inspires sympathy and is followed, etc., is not this person to be a particular genius, but to give the right answer when it's needed. So that, for example, there are people who give incredibly banal or superficial answers, but let's say for that specific context, that's okay. So it works, and people tend, even that obviously maybe do not really know much about that topic, to get okay, well, to say, well, that guy is really cool, right? Because he answers, and this happens quite frequently. It happens also in politics. You hear many thinkers and commentators and other persons that become terribly famous because they give you this, ready and quick answer, and they know what they're saying, and obviously they have also their thoughts, their opinion, etc. But sometimes it becomes, well, in that case, maybe as a confection package, but at the same time, if it works for that specific target, well, that's what you're required, and that's in war, exactly in the same way. The war in itself, this is what von Clausewitz really says, it is, in the way it's led especially, it's actually a very simple affair. I mean, conceptually speaking, it doesn't get overcomplicated in the essentials. On the contrary, it's because the world system is so overly complicated that war tends to really get down in terms of leadership, in commands and unity, etc. Pretty simple, relatively simple at least. While naturally what's behind it and within it, that it's dramatically complicated. So obviously, even to get to those choices, it's better if you have thought about it very carefully. But still, all you have to do is basically to hit the point, right? And here, what von Clausewitz says is what we said before. Basically, you know that answer the guy is posed, gives when it's posed a question, wouldn't have the same effectiveness if the guy went home, read all his books and it could go back to give that answer, right? It's kind of it's also how it happens on the internet. Everybody can, doesn't show what it's doing, where checking books, etc., and can give the answer. So everybody's a genius apparently, but also in there, it's not quite the same thing all the time. And in here, it's interesting that von Clausewitz says that this instantaneous act of the mind produces a pleasing impression. I mean, this is really important because it also convinces the other that whoever he is, whether the person was posed a question or just an observer, but even the person was provided the answer, to be in kind of this dialectically polemical competition, to sound like the winner. Right, that's basically the thing. I'm not sure here von Clausewitz really stresses this, but it's obvious that in war this has an importance, at least for the outcome, right? So von Clausewitz comments saying the expression presence of mind certainly denotes very fitly the readiness and rapidity of the help rendered by the mind. So he is simply, saying that's a kind of a good expression to understand what here we're talking about. Then he says, whether this noble quality of a man is to be ascribed more to the peculiarity of his mind or to the equanimity of his feelings depends on the nature of the case. Although neither of the two can be entirely wanting, right? So this is also important, because basically he's telling us that the presence of the mind derives, can derive from these two in turn, but these two qualities: the peculiarity of the person's mind, or the equanimity of his feelings. So the ratio depends on the nature of the case, but never these are to be, one of the two is to entirely lack. Simply also because it's impossible from a biological point of view. Also in here, what I think von Clausewitz is saying is, by presenting this duo, the peculiarity of the mind and the equanimity of the feelings, we can read the reflection of, let's say, the understanding and the and resolution in some way, so that the first is a more kind of an intellectual thing, the second is more related to the emotional thing, but at the same time they're a bit more complex and probably much, let's say, as deeply intertwined, at least, as those as the other pair. Simply because, but at the same time, I think they're fascinating, because the peculiarity of someone's mind definitely makes you realize that, you may have any kind of reason for which you're so ready and rapid with your mind, right? It can derive from many things. You can be a particularly smart person, or may have a particularly good experience at that thing. And as we've seen, by the way, war is the field into which this gets more complicated, right? So there is also a lot of non-scientifically categorizable, I don't know whether it sounds correct, into this, because the outcome really depends on the nature of the case in itself. So you can find even maybe a person who is apparently not so talented or qualified, that actually has this presence of the mind, right? Oh yeah, you're a genius, right? Even if maybe he's just an idiot, but usually, but that can work also in that way. So it really can happen in very different ways. At the same time, what is fascinating in here, probably even more than the intellectual side, is the equanimity of the feelings, in my opinion. Because von Clausewitz has put the accent, in fact, on what if the guy waits there, answers after 2 hours of reading for sorting out a good solution, right? It's as if into this, probably the intellectual side was relatively, I can say it's relatively unimportant in comparison to the feelings, but it's pretty obvious that when you're challenged, you also have to have some character, some temper on your own. This readiness, this rapidity, is to come also from the measure in which you're able to engage into the challenge. So the equanimity of the feelings are also very important, because here it's as if there was a balance, right? You don't have to be too hasty. You don't have to be, because what von Clausewitz is really saying is that it doesn't suffice to just answer, right? You can be, you can give even a ready and rapid answer, but it can be by far maybe even the worst one. So the presence of your mind requires a sort of wisdom that has to be attached into the theory, and it has to be grounded into the theory and the practice, and also in here it has to be properly trained, right? So the more experience you get, the better it is, but still it's probably much more multifaceted in the various, given the various cases you can be confronted with, and it's also very difficult to track, because let's be honest about this, von Clausewitz is talking fundamentally about something that happens in the individual's mind. So he naturally puts very much the accent on the individual responsibility and commitment and courage and intelligence, etc. At the same time, he's not telling you, look, this really probably happens in the mind in the same way, but it's still, the other person really doesn't know what's going on in your mind at that point. Like, how did they do it? There are things like this. There are people who become temporarily heroes because they do something pretty amazing and impressive, and everybody says, how the hell did that happen? Maybe they gained their hour of notoriety and blah. I don't know what I'm saying right now, of notoriety in that context, but maybe they were just lucky, right? So this is important, and that's why also in the previous passages von Clausewitz was talking about the need for having an average, account of the average, fundamentally speaking, when assessing whether the individual has those specific qualities, so that, say, everybody can get a shot, but if you're someone worthy or not, it's only time and experience, and let's say in practice, are gonna prove ultimately. So this works a bit in parallel, a bit like that, what we were telling about the understanding and resolution. Von Clausewitz makes actually the same case here. And in conclusion, he says, a telling repartee bespeaks rather a ready wit, a ready expedient on sudden danger implies more particularly a well-balanced mind. So, stressing this aspect. So, you can get a happy, you can provide a happy answer, right? And you can be maybe just like this because you're the local buffoon that is used to provide the witty, let's say the funny answer, right? But that is not really gonna be all enough. This, especially in war, that obviously requires something much greater in terms of moral resources proper. You have to have an equilibrated spirit more than else. It is to say, while you're shattered by the fear of danger, of responsibility, of pressure, etc., you, in order to have that presence of mind, you have to be pretty well balanced at that point. And here from Clausewitz is not saying how it happens, because it's not the problem. He's just making us reflect on the sheer difficulty and the variables that can occur in here to basically to make that ineffective in the moment you're gonna take the decision. You're gonna provide the threat with the answer. So it's and sometimes this is very natural, very fascinating in other contexts, especially the ones we may know the most, like the intellectual one, when maybe there is someone particularly intelligent that gives an extremely intelligent answer, but maybe the interlocutor is so dumb doesn't even understand what's beyond that, and this happens dramatically often. It's also a problem how certain opinions are accepted or discarded, but here in fact it's not like this. Here we're talking about war, so a myth grinder, literally, in which you can't really get very relativistic in what you're doing, because whichever decision you take, that's gonna have a pretty serious result, right? If anything, for if not maybe for your, hopefully for your own men, but for on the ones of the enemy, for example. So this is also gonna be, not necessarily imperfectly quantified or measured, but it's gonna have an effect. That is to say, if you smash the enemy army thanks to your presence of mind, well, that's really what it was needed, right? So I find extremely fascinating how von Clausewitz really individuates, identifies the what's really the deal and the problem, and never getting unbalanced in this aspects. I mean, he's not giving you a meter. He's teaching you what distance is, and it's way more useful in many ways, because at that point the meter is just something you may have to use in a particular context, but in order to think bigger, you have to to go far beyond that context. So that's what von Clausewitz is doing, and I believe that in part, aside from all these historiographical problems and in the theory of war, etc., one day we'll have to talk about it, because there are really lots of people who fell into the trap of individuals like Little Hart and all these that had to demolish von Clausewitz, obviously failing clamorously, but still talking at levels that the average person is too stupid to understand, and therefore making those people following them and falling into that trap. But von Clausewitz in this is the real genius, because this is not about a specific context. This is how it happens literally all the time, because it's defined in this within these boundaries, and is simply trying to, for now, to make you aware of what happens when certain things, for example, go wrong, which is ultimately, I believe, the most important thing. Rather than if things go well, you don't even wonder, but that's also pretty dangerous, and it can easily lead you to, in fact, things getting seriously wrong at that point, because you lowered the guard, or you didn't even realize what happened, and therefore making you identify the, if anything, the dynamic, right? Where does this start from? What is that is really needed at that point? What is that you're gonna follow? And you already understand that, given the example of the person that is followed, even maybe without having any particular quality, or at least any exceptional quality, well, reading von Clausewitz already makes you understand that the things are that you have to automatically discard this criterion, because things are dramatically more complex and complicated than you can expect. And this could have actually many more implications that we cannot discuss now, but that should make you a bit more alert about what's going on, right? And trying to read this book, if anything, this work at least, for the clarity of thought and the coherence and the logics and the rationality of its foundations. I mean, it's something that you don't find very often today. I mean, today we can all write and say our tiny stupid thing and feel proud about it. But first of all, that's just a tiny little treat for making us feel, somehow worthy or important. But the culture we are producing is largely lacking this new foundations. Like in the 19th century, these people were trying really to, well, actually, down to the 19th century, things were getting a bit towards our direction. That's why von Clausewitz is writing actually in the same exact counter tendency of these attitudes, let's say, because he's making us reflect that on the fact that you cannot pretend that reality bends to your subjective perception, that reality works just by making a mere abstraction, So these foundations are rooted into what's the best of us, fundamentally rationality, and what really eludes from the individual, let's say the subjective um, um, opinion of the matter based on, let's say, things that have sometimes not to do with rationality. Because if I believe in rationality, I believe in the truth, and to me the most obvious consequence of this is that you can't have two people with two different opinions. And obviously I believe that they are both entitled and to express it in any way, but it follows obviously that one of the two has to be at least better than the other, right? So there can't be any relativism relatively to this, about this. And what's happening today is the same exact contrary. That is to say, not everybody gets to speak, which is what we rightfully fought for in the previous, in our past, but that everybody's opinion is at the same level. This is like literally one of probably the single most terrifying and dreadful and destructive idea that you can ever get. No opinion is equal to another, as much as no person is absolutely no equal to another. And this doesn't have nothing to do with the right that we have in its equality. Equal rights are created exactly because we are different, not because equal rights make us equal. We're not even supposed to be equal in the first place. With the crazy and the totalitarianism brought to the to what this to the consequences of this idea that everybody had to be alike. And that's the only realistic scenario in which obviously you can't be alike, but in which this can be imposed politically, as a sort of legitimized choice, right? At that point, that's not really a very happy thing. So reading these works is really confronting you with a person who has no other, personal, let's say, obviously there is an animosity sometimes, some irony towards, but it's just introductive towards, explaining the reason why the person has written the book, but not in the way the book is really written, because the book is written, and we have seen it pretty clearly now, in a fashion that makes you reflect from the very basis and builds upon them rationally. And Von Clausewitz doesn't hide anything to it. You can check step by step, and that's how it works. Find me a person today that can really produce a work like this. In terms of logical chaining and rational understanding and actual scientific accuracy, because most of what he writes is actually pretty correct, pretty accurate from a psychological point of view, anthropological point of view, and especially talking about war, about how war really is. And believe me, it's when you just make an example, when you talk about what war really is in 2019, this is showing some emotional, clips of bombings, people getting killed, and shouts and suffering. In the year von Clausewitz published this, talking about war was really trying to define what this is all about. And through reason. So you understand how the shift has been from reason to emotion, right? So this is a qualitative fall. And the reason why this fall happens is that, fortunately, actually, for people like von Clausewitz that thought and worked with reason to build this, we managed to build a better world that, however, does require us now less effort, and as a consequence makes us, on average, much dumber. and it's bad. So that's why we have to invent all the most useless problems and fighting on the base of them, because we completely lacked the education deriving from these minds, right? So naturally there will be a lot of other things now, and I stop for real, but it's evident that this is more than a worthy read, and we need to take it ever more into consideration when it comes to policy, war, society, and naturally especially about war. But for now, let's end it here. So for now, I hope just that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.